Welcome. Welcome to Move to Learn, the Handspring webinar series for manual therapists and movement educators. Today is Wednesday, June 23rd, and we are delighted to welcome you and your participation with the co-editors of the new book, The Feldenkrais Method, Learning Through Movement, Dr. Staffan Elgelid and Chrish Kresge will be leading us today in an understanding of the historical importance and the contemporary significance of the Feldenkrais method. Let's take a look at the cover of their book now. And a reminder at letting you know that you have a generous discount of 20% discount when you use the code on the screen for checkout of this book. And this code is good through July 30th. This gorgeous book, The Feldenkrais Method, Learning Through Movement, is a comprehensive and very accessible book that is groundbreaking in that it includes work from chapters from 24 contributors, leaders in the Feldenkrais community. It also incorporates QR codes so that you can experience the Feldenkrais awareness through movement lessons in audio and video form. Before meeting Staffan and Chrish, let's take a look at how things work, what you can expect during our webinar. The webinar will comprise roughly 45 minutes of discussion, presentation, and guided practice, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A. The chat is on, so please do say hello and tell us where you're joining from. The Feldenkrais method is revered, practiced, and loved worldwide, and we'd like to know where you are. We welcome your questions. Please submit these using the Q&A button on your screen. Although we normally finish promptly on the hour and aim to answer as many questions as we can, we will be able today to go 10 minutes after the hour, so be generous with your questions. Please come prepared for a movement experience and have a firm chair to hand, or for that matter, a firm chair on which to sit. We are recording the webinar and we'll share a link to it in our follow-up email so you can watch it again and experience the Feldenkrais method. We're streaming live on YouTube, and we would just like to mention in our disclaimer that this discussion is for informational and illustrative purposes only and is not meant to impart medical or therapeutic advice or instruction. It's a pleasure now to introduce the co-editors of this gorgeous book. Chrish Kresge is a Feldenkrais practitioner who works with people of all ages and backgrounds, using movement and awareness as the tool for restoring and improving function, coordination, and health. She has been teaching the Feldenkrais method across the world for over 2 decades and offers her students the potential for mental and physical well-being through effortless and pleasurable ways of experiencing themselves. Dr. Staffan Elgelid is a professor of physical therapy at Nazareth College, yoga therapist, and Feldenkrais practitioner. Staffan is on the board of directors of the Yoga Alliance. He co-edited Yoga Therapy, Theory and Practice, and is co-editor of Yoga for Stress and Anxiety and Yoga for Active Adults. In addition to giving workshops on Feldenkrais yoga and wellness, Staffan also works with athletes and other performers who are interested in optimizing their performance. Staffan and Chrish, welcome to Move to Learn.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
It's great to be here.
Given that the Feldenkrais method has been around for decades, how do you explain that it is enjoying a resurgence worldwide, reaching more people than it ever did during Moshe's lifetime?
Staffan,
I'll let you start that one, Chris.
Okay. I think that in this fast-paced world, we're all trying to get more fit and do more. We have a lot more stimulation, a lot more input, and it's the method now seems more appropriate than ever in that we have an opportunity to slow down, pay attention, and learn to move again the way nature meant us to move. And that is movements that are based on developmental movements of babies, movements where we are not trying to strain or necessarily exercise, but really improve our own human functioning. And it's an appropriate time in that so many of us want to be fit, and yet there's so many injuries. And right now, I think it's an ideal time to begin a Feldenkrais practice or to continue your Feldenkrais practice.
Yeah, and I tend to agree. I think people are more stressed than ever. And maybe COVID made us slow down a little bit. And the Feldenkrais method to some extent makes you slow down. It's a slowness of the movements, and it's an awareness that, you know, all this speed and everything is just moving us away from the bodies, and we want to feel and we want to sense ourselves again. And also, I mean, there are more and more people getting older. I mean, we know how that curve goes, and everyone wants to stay active as long as they can in a healthy body without any injuries. So I think everything is speaking for the Feldenkrais method becoming more and more popular based on society right now.
May we take a look now at the slideshow that you've prepared, because that will take us, I think, through a comprehensive understanding.
So here is Dr. Moshe Feldenkrais, obviously a little bit later on in his life in Freiburg, Germany. And we love this picture because it really shows his own engagement and brilliance and intelligence. He was born in the Ukraine, many iterations of actually it was called Belarus at the time, in 1904. He lived to the age of 80 and had an extraordinarily rich life, emigrating at the age of 16 to Palestine, became a freedom fighter, and really he was a survivor. And I wanted to just give a quote from actually the foreword of the book by Jerry Carson. And he says, Moshe was a survivor. His work about the human body, its musculoskeletal system, and its relationship centers around this aspect of his thinking. The coat he carried around with him had recording devices, extra batteries, all sorts of scissors, sewing materials, bandages, antibiotics, water purification tablets, and cash in numerous currency, including Swiss and French francs and US dollars. And this really shows that one of the principles of our work is, it's a physics principle, and he was a physics, had his degree, a PhD in engineering and physics from the Sorbonne, but to be able to move in any direction without hesitation or preparation. And this really is one of the main tenets of how we learn and teach this work. He went on to teach his method in Europe, in the United States, and is famous for 2 training programs he had in the United States, one in San Francisco and one in Amherst, Massachusetts. Staffan, do you want to add something to that?
No, I think that pretty much covered it. You know, and so much of his method was based in the martial arts and the judo that he developed. As we'll see on the next slide, there's a photo of him in judo, and I think he learned a lot of his movements out of there, and the center of the pelvis and so forth. So I think you covered it well, Chrish.
So yeah, so the martial arts are really an important part of Moshe's evolution. He actually began to study jiu-jitsu when he was in Palestine. He was also, of course, one of the founders of the Land of Israel. But he then traveled to Paris. And as I said earlier, he was at the Sorbonne. And while there, he met the founder of judo, Jigoro Kano. And he was astounded that some of the work that Moshe, was already doing was exactly what he found in Kano's own demonstration of judo. And actually, Moshe became the first black belt in judo in Europe and used the principles of judo in his method. It was very, very informative. And one of the chapters actually in our book is by Moti Nativ, who is, of course, a martial arts expert and shows the roots of the Feldenkrais method in judo. So very, very important fact about the evolution of the method. And, he wrote a lot of different books. And I think the reason we wanted to include this slide is just to show the various titles of his books: The Elusive Obvious, The Potent Self, A Study of Spontaneity and Compulsion, Body and Mature Behavior, Study of Anxiety, Sex, Gravitation, and Learning. It was extraordinary that all of his works stand the test of time. You can pick up any one of his books and open them and read, and it has relevancy to today, how we learn, how we act, and how we can improve ourselves through movement, but with attention, through awareness. So maybe the next slide. And I'm going to show you a little bit of something about how the Feldenkrais method, in very, very simple ways, can teach us how to organize ourselves using these physics principles of distribution of effort. No place works harder than any other place. And the big bones do the big work, and the smaller bones do the delicate work, which is, when you think about it, a very important one. So would you please come to the front of your chair, wherever you're sitting, make sure that it's that it's firm. And I'm going to go onto my Feldenkrais table here, and maybe I'll take my microphone with me here. And just sit towards the front part of the chair comfortably. And if you look down at your knees, see that you don't see your feet. So don't have your feet too far in front, but bring them a little bit behind you. That's great. Now, the movements essentially are slow, and sometimes it's hard to go slow. So encourage yourself to really slow down, do less, but feel more. Try to really sense your own awareness as you move through this very simple movement that I'm going to teach you. To begin with, just let your belly go and listen to your breathing and allow your face to become soft. Just be here right now. And then slowly, please, would you turn to look around yourself to your right? In other words, just look a little bit to see, well, how far can I look, and find a point on the wall that is your reference point for how far you can see right now. So try not to strain to get there, but just turn and look and say, okay, yeah, I can see that thing over there. And come back to the middle. And then very slowly go to the left and see, oh gosh, it might be quite a different story when you turn to the left, or it might be easier or not so easy. But these are your reference points and guides for how is your range of movement as we begin to move. And gradually come back. And even as you come back, just really settle and feel how you're sitting on your sit bones. And then please, could you take your two hands and frame your face so that the heels of your hands are at your jawline and your fingertips is just around the orbs of your eyes. So right there. And take your elbows and simply press them gently against your chest so that they can feel the rib cage. Not too hard, but just so that you can feel the contact. And without holding your breath, would you please slowly turn again to the right and see how it's a different movement. It might be a little more constrained, but you're using more of your trunk and less of your neck. So go once a little bit to the right, come to the middle, go a little bit to the left, but I know you want to go further, but just do the smallest movement that you can and trust in your capacity to pay attention to the quality as you do this a couple of times. And then come back, rest your hands on your legs, on your thighs. And now think about the biggest bone in your body, your pelvis. You're sitting on it right now. And think, could you take your left knee a little forward and your right one back without moving your feet, so that the left side of your pelvis glides back and the right side glides forward. An inch is fine. And come back and do that a couple of times, and notice as you bring your left knee forward how it actually turns your spine and your sternum a little bit to the right. And this biggest bone of your body can actually do all of this slowly. Feel how the rib cage is turning, and come back. Slowly bring your hands back up to your face, back to our elbows on the chest. Allow yourself to breathe, to soften. And now put these two things together, the turning and bringing your left knee a little forward while the right knee goes back, and turn a little bit to the right, maybe 2 or 3 times slowly. Each time sensing if you're getting in the way of yourself by clenching somewhere, holding your breath. Do it a couple of times and then come back. Come back to the middle, so you've only gone to the right. And simply turn your head and look a little to the right again and see, is your range of motion a little bit further than it was before? In fact, you could probably measure that it's quite a bit further to the right. And this is really because you've used more of yourself. So an even distribution of effort and including more of yourself to do the movement. Now take your hands once more up to your face. And now we're going to add one more element, and this element is differentiation. So slowly turn to the right, breathe, bring your left knee forward, your right knee back. And once you go as far as you can comfortably, stay there and send just your eyes a little further to the right. I know it's tempting to go further, but just stay in the place where you're comfortable and send your eyes a little to the right, a little to the left, a little to the right again, no straining. Come back again very slowly, sequentially, feeling how your spine slowly unravels. Float your hands gently back to your lap. Let your belly go, let your jaw go. And now once more, turn to look to the right and see, how far do you see now? And did all of these little elements of using the eyes, the chest, the ribs, and your attention change? And just in your own time, how about you try to do this going to the left? So could you bring your right knee forward and your left knee back a few times? Feeling how the right side of the pelvis turns your chest a little to the left as you bring it forward. That's very nice. Excellent. Come back, take your hands on your face. Be determined not to go too far, but to do less than you can, and trust in the how rather than in how far. Slowly turn to the left, glide your right knee forward. And when you go as far as you can comfortably, simply send now your eyes a little further to the left and back, and maybe to the left and then to the right and back, slowly, breathingly, elegantly, smoothly. And then gradually bring everything back, sequentially, back to the middle. Float your hands back onto your lap. And then look to the left and see what it's like. Can you feel how there's a change from when you first began? And there's nothing magic about this, even though sometimes Moshe Feldenkrais was called Mr. Hocus Pocus, but it's really recruiting the brain's attention that makes these changes possible. And then just bow forward and come to stand and just notice how you are in standing for a moment. And turn a little right, a little left, and see when you include more of yourself, you might feel a little bit taller, more elegant. And thank you very much for your beautiful movement. And that is the end of our first movement lesson. Thank you. So maybe Hillary, you can go to the next slide, please.
So part of, or you can say the heart of the Feldenkrais method is really about learning. And there's more and more talk today about learning and neuroplasticity and how we learn throughout our whole lives, and learning really never stops. It only stops when we stop it, when we become too habitual and so forth. But Moshe was very, very clear that learning was at the heart of his method, and learning took place for him through moving the body in non-habitual ways and bringing awareness to how we're moving, and through that also how we're relating to others and how we're acting in life and so forth. So function and relationships were really, really important to Moshe. When he developed this, we couldn't look on MRIs and so forth and see that learning actually took place, or changes took place in the brain with movement and so forth. But now we know that movement can really change brain structure. It can change the nervous system, and learning is really about changing the nervous system, if you look at the Feldenkrais method here. Chrish will talk a little bit more about how Moshe then used the skeleton in his principles of learning.
Yeah, thank you. So here is Moshe in San Francisco. This was already in the 70s. And he, I think, was a pioneer in using the skeleton to help us understand the importance of the skeleton itself, that it's a structure which we use to become lighter, to become more agile. So contrary to what we think is the bones make us feel heavy, they're actually designed in their way of being organized on top of one structure, on top of each other, for us to be able to walk, run, jump, and have this springy feeling. A skeleton was designed to make us feel light. And he had a skeleton in every training program, and we all, of course, have one. We all of us practitioners use it, because mostly people are focused on strengthening their muscles without appreciating that the skeletal structure is really fundamental. And now there's more and more evidence that, of course, the skeleton and bone and muscles and fascia and tendons and ligaments are all part of the same matter, but bone now is considered still to be a part of all of those elements. The liquid crystalline matrix, for those of you who are interested in biotensegrity. The skeleton, I think we could go to the next slide. So here is one of the contributors of the book, Donna Ray, and she is demonstrating on a skeleton and also showing her students how we work in individual lessons called functional integration. She has her hands on the pelvis, of course, because in most training programs, the teacher says, any question that you ask, the answer is going to be pelvis, because it's just that important. And here in functional integration, it's when the practitioner and the student come together and they move really in coordination, so that it's not an application of some kind of technique, but really that the client and the practitioner come to a higher standard them together and move better together. But ideally, when we work with someone one-on-one, we are teaching them movement options and perhaps bringing their attention to habits they didn't know that they had, habits that maybe don't serve them. So we do it through touch, very gentle touch, non-invasive touch on a table such as you see here and behind me. And it's designed really to elicit new ways, not just of moving, but of thinking. Functional integration is the one-on-one application of our work. So next slide, please, Hilary.
So there's also a group way to teach the Feldenkrais method, and it's called awareness through movement. And this is probably how most people have interacted with the Feldenkrais method. It's the teacher will take the group through a sequence of movements based on some function. The function is kind of decided upon or is built into the movements here. And the student can then, just like when Chrish did this short lesson here, they can notice a difference from the start when they did the movement to how it feels at the end, and they can show them a change in movement. It's hard to say, it's an improvement or it's a bigger movement or so forth, but there's a change in movement, and that change hopefully then will also raise the curiosity and the awareness of the student to say, what really happened here? How did this happen? And they will then continue at home to become aware of how they're moving and how the movement influences their daily lives and so forth. So we have functional integration, we have awareness through movement. So next slide, please.
And there are literally thousands of awareness through movement lessons. There's a very large body of work. And of course, everybody's always improvising, but nevertheless, the basic fundamental movements that Feldenkrais taught are luckily accessible to us as practitioners to learn and to be able to teach them. And we like this photograph actually because it shows, again, the ubiquitous skeleton in the background, and another well-known trainer on the left side, Dennis Leary. And Larry Goldfarb is one of our trainers who is currently teaching also trainings in the United States and in Holland as well. Next slide.
Yeah, and also just to come back to the awareness through movement lessons, in the book with the QR codes, there are several awareness through movement lessons that you can practice and play with. And the contributors, the authors, have recorded those lessons so that it connects to the chapter in the book that they wrote. So Moshe was one of the early people who used rollers in his work too. Now we see rollers absolutely everywhere. Actually, one of the contributors, Stacy, have her own rollers that she has developed. But you see rollers used for stretching, they're used for strengthening, they're used for balance, they're used for everything. And I think Moshe used them a little bit different in that he used them for support. Sometimes it was support to get the nervous system to kind of calm down. Sometimes he used them to make the movement easier. He probably used them sometimes to challenge the nervous system too, but he used them thinking about the nervous system and using them more as support instead of stretching and strengthening and balance and all that. But he was one of the early ones who really used these rollers and really contributed to making the rollers more popular.
And here he is giving a functional, you can just go back for 1 second, integration lesson to a child. And he actually really did a lot of work with children. And this was maybe his most brilliant iteration, is learning and teaching, working with children. This child has cerebral palsy, and he is not forcing, he is really using the child's brain and attention and his own involvement to help this child overcome the spasticity. And he, one of his first assistant, Mia Segal, used to talk about how he called functional integration human body sculpting initially, before it was called functional integration. I want to mention that because it was really a question of how the hands-on work can really give so much information. As you can see how he has his hands on her thighs here. Beautiful. And Stacy's making some comments in the chat that we should all look at. So next slide, please. And here is another one of the contributors, Anat Baniel, who is really well known for her own evolution of the work and works with children. She has her own method, which is called the Anat Baniel method for neuromovement. And she works a lot with children and with adults as well. And has written a chapter in the book. Next slide.
So the Feldenkrais method, and part of the book is we divide it up into sections for, like, Anat working with children, we have working with the elderly, working with musicians, dancers, athletes, and so forth. So this was about working with musicians, because musicians are putting a lot of strain on their bodies. I do work a fair amount with musicians, and so much of it is the students tend to be very, very static, and they think they have to hold themselves a certain way, and they practice for hours and hours and hours. And a lot of times, either they hold themselves really, really stiffly, or they really lose the support of the chair and they lose the support of the ground through the feet. Here you can see how rollers are being used to really increase the awareness of the sits bones in the feet, to use the ground. And Moshe, being a martial artist too, using the ground was really, really important for him here. So here, this is an example then of how can we increase the awareness of how you use the ground, how you use the sits bones, how you ground yourself, and how you get stability from the ground up. Now, I also work with musicians that are holding themselves too stiffly, and they end up with neck problems, shoulder problems, hand problems. And then you have to teach them how to move from the pelvis then. So again, like Chrish said, it all comes back to the pelvis. So especially for people that play the piano or do anything else in seated, how do they use the pelvis here? And how can they move the pelvis without losing the grounding? Because if you lose the ground, then that's not going to be beneficial. I use a fair amount of rollers when I work with the musicians, but I don't necessarily start them with the rollers. But this is more of an advanced application of how to utilize the rollers here. Next slide, please.
So, we really work a lot with performing artists, and here is Jeff Haller, who is also a senior trainer in the Feldenkrais Method, working with a dancer. And many of us have worked with dancers and movers and athletes, but dancers in particular that are so prone to injury and overuse benefit greatly, as this young woman has. And Elizabeth, you wanted to say something also about someone that you knew that, please, about the dancer.
Oh, thank you, Chrish. I'm really on the edge of my Feldenkrais bench here, brimming over with excitement to hear about all the contributors in the chapter. I'm fortunate, being in the Bay Area, to have been a student in the ballet studio with the late Augusta Moore, a former dancer with San Francisco Ballet, who then trained in the Feldenkrais Method and created an approach to teaching, a very unique approach to teaching ballet that was appreciated by hundreds of her students, and found that the Feldenkrais, the approach to learning with the Feldenkrais method, really informed the inner dancer.
And we should say also that you trained with Anat Baniel, that you shared with us the other day, which is wonderful.
Yes, I was exceedingly fortunate to be in a guild Feldenkrais training, with the 4-year training with Anat Baniel. And I must be happy to add that the Feldenkrais method is the most influential approach to movement that I use daily for decades in my work with Pilates clients and gyrotonic clients, gyrokinesis clients, a whole host of things. And I'm so grateful that your book is out now, because although I'd love to do another training, maybe I'll just start with the book instead.
I should mention also that in the chat, Paul Puiwo Lee, who's just posted again, he contributed a chapter on dance to the book, and it's a lovely chapter. And he's worked a lot with the Ballet of Copenhagen, and had a huge influence. So dancers are well represented in our book. Thank you. Next slide.
And also dancers, if I come back to dancers just for a second, a lot of times we think that they have so much body awareness, but a lot of the training I find when I teach it, because I teach a class for the dancers at the school I'm at, they're so focused on how they look in the mirror that they sometimes lose themselves. So the benefit of more awareness of what actually happens inside instead of how it looks can be very beneficial too. Next
I think
slide,
that's
please.
a really important point, actually. And our classes are taught typically. The awareness through movement classes are we begin almost every lesson lying on our back, and there's really not. We're discouraged from looking in the mirror because we want to really go back to our own felt sense of ourselves and our kinesthetic sense as opposed to how we look. So this is a slide about Linda Tellington Jones, who wrote a chapter in the book about working with animals, as she still does famously. And the first picture is her doing a demonstration on a horse, and you could see Moshe Feldenkrais on the right is watching. This was in the Amherst training in Amherst, Massachusetts. And the reason I wanted to select this slide is that she had a lovely insight in her training. She trained in the 1970s in San Francisco, and she understood that using non-habitual movements can elicit huge change. And so she worked and trained with horses, and sometimes she would get very stubborn and recalcitrant horses that had been traumatized. And she was very skilled, but she upgraded her way of working when she did the training, because she realized that when she did a non-habitual movement with her horse, it changed the entire horse's pattern and thinking and took them out of this body pattern of anxiety. And this body pattern of anxiety is something that actually is a chapter in one of Feldenkrais's books called Body and Mature Behavior. And it presupposes that any living animal, human, goes into an anxiety pattern and sometimes maintains that pattern throughout their lives until some non-habitual movement or even a thought can change, and it subsequently changes their entire way of being. That's how powerful our habits are. And yet a small non-habitual movement can recruit the nervous system and the attention in a way that makes profound changes. And so in this case, she tweaked the horse's tail in a way that the horse had just turned the horse's tail, and it immediately became a docile, very gentle horse again. So I wanted to share that because I think it's indicative of Moshe's thinking, that when we get out of our own habits, all sorts of exciting things can happen. So thank you, Hillary, for the next slide. Ooh.
So, as Chrish said, even animals have anxiety, and with the quick and stressful life that we're living today, it's really important that we learn how to balance our nervous system. There's so much talk about the autonomic nervous system in rehab, in yoga, in everywhere we talk about it and how to balance it. So we need to come up with some quick ways and easy ways to do it. Well, if we want to influence the nervous system, really on the brain, the biggest representation is going to be our tongue inside of our mouth and our hands. Well, there are some really cool lessons about the tongue. Unfortunately, it's kind of weird to work with the tongue when you're around other people. They look at you really funny and it's hard to talk. But we can utilize the hand, and there's a lesson called the bell hand that we can utilize in almost any situation, and we can use it very, very quickly. So if you take your right hand, put a palm up, you can put on your lap or the table in front of you, or just where it's supported, and just put the attention, the awareness into your right hand. And don't try to change anything. Just become aware of the right hand and just very, very gently start to open and close the hand. But don't go all the way. Just do maybe a 1/10 of an opening and closing. It's not like you're going to make a fist, because that's kind of aggressive, like you want to hit someone. But just how softly can you move your hand? How softly can you just open and close? And can you connect it with the breath? So you breathe in and you breathe out. So one cycle of breathing is one cycle of open and closing. So now you coordinate the breath with the movement, which is something that we focus on in yoga, and we'll talk about yoga in a second here. And I'm not saying you should breathe in when you open or breathe out when you open. Just find your own rhythm, find your own habit here. And now can you make the movement even smaller, even slower? So you slow down the breath more, slow down the movement. And then very gently, can you touch the thumb and the second finger? But you just touch it so gently that you're just touching the outer layer of the cells. You're not making an indentation into the fingers here. And then gently move them apart, still with the breath. And then you can do the thumb and the middle finger. But it's so gentle, it's so soft, and it follows the breath. And again, just barely touching. And then thumb and little finger. And then come back. Just very gently. Movement might be so small that if someone was watching you, they couldn't even see that you're actually making a movement here. But it's the sense of open and close. And this lesson could be going on for a good 45 minutes. And there are several versions of it where you also then start moving your hand. You might bend your elbow, move your hand up to your face. So you also get that softness of the hand into your face. But just getting this sense of the softness of the hand and coordinated with the breath really engages the parasympathetic nervous system, and it makes us slow down the breath, slow down the movement, and it tends to help with the anxiety. So this is something that you can use when you're at work or in any situation you're in almost. So thank you.
Thank you, Staffan. It was so nice.
So I utilize the Feldenkrais method in yoga quite a bit. Again, yoga coordinates movement and the breath, and there are all kinds of poses, of breath practices, of meditations and so forth. But if I look at it from a body position here, if you do cat and cow, for example, what I found in yoga students and yoga teachers is that they do the movement the same way over and over and over again. So if I have someone who's doing cat and cow, and I might say, okay, can you do the cat pose keeping your pelvis stable? Can you do the cow pose, keeping it stable so that I can encourage movement in a different part of the spine? Then they'll come back and do the movement again, like they normally would do it, and they can feel movement in different places here. So again, it's spreading the movement out throughout the whole movement system. In the cat and cow pose, it's more about the spine. You can also play with where do they start the movement, because most of the time you'll find they start the movement from the same place over and over and over again. So if they started in the low back, you can say, can you now start the movement from the thoracic spine? Can you start the movement from the head? So you can give a lot of varieties in the poses that the person is doing, thereby getting different benefits of movement. And there are overuse injuries in yoga today because people do it the same way over and over and over again. So this, again, it's playing with the nervous system, because they have to learn to move in a different way. They have to learn to stabilize somewhere else. But it also can really be injury preventive, and it makes it more fun. It makes it more fun for the nervous system, because the nervous system has to solve these movement puzzles. And I think it makes it more interesting. So we can really utilize it for yoga. And the next slide shows Pilates, and this is Stacey Barrows, who wrote a great chapter on how to utilize the Feldenkrais method in Pilates. And to some extent, it could be the same thing as in yoga. Can we do the movement in a slightly different way? Pilates, depending on who's teaching and how it's being taught, can be very, very stylistic and very restrictive almost, in a way, in that you do it this way or that way. But if we think it from a nervous system perspective, then if we start playing with the Feldenkrais method here, introducing movement starting from somewhere else, maintaining the principles of Pilates, we can really get some really interesting effects here. And it's something that I've seen growing in the Pilates world. Is a little bit more variety in the movement here. Next slide, please. And then we have therapeutic applications, especially then in rehabilitation, because there are a lot of people who are trained in the Feldenkrais method, who are physical therapists, occupational therapists, nurses, healthcare workers, and so forth, because they came to a realization that while rehab is great, there's still something missing. We can really improve it. And I think what happens with the Feldenkrais method is they start looking at the humans from a nervous system perspective and from the learning aspect. In general, in training of healthcare workers, we don't think of movement as learning as much. We're thinking of stretching and strengthening. But if you take the Feldenkrais method and you apply it in the healthcare world, if you're licensed to work in the healthcare world, it really looks at the human being, and it looks at rehab from a learning perspective. Someone here is someone who had an ankle problem, for example. Well, if you twist your ankle, you're going to stiffen up the ankle, and you're going to move in a way that is adaptive to avoid the pain. And even after the ankle heals, that's still what's going on. Using an artificial floor here with the person lying down, so the nervous system is relaxed, I can take the ankle through a variety of movements here in a safe way. No weight bearing, it's in a safe way here. And it can train the nervous system to say, hey, it's actually safe to move here. And you can rehab the movements back. So it's more than just stretching and strengthening. Same for someone who's had a stroke or any kind of nervous system disease or insult. We can take this and we can use the artificial floor for someone who had a stroke, because they might not be able to put the full weight on that leg, or they don't have the sense all the way down into the leg here. So it grounds them, and it teaches the nervous system. We work with the nervous system. We look at what can the person do, where are they starting, and then we can develop it from there. Chronic pain is another area that we use the Feldenkrais method in. We know now that most of chronic pain, or a lot of chronic pain, really has nothing to do with tissue injury anymore. It's more of a nervous system. So through the Feldenkrais method, we can teach the person to move in a safe way. And it doesn't matter where we start the movement then. If someone has chronic pain, for example, it's just getting the sense of safety in movement. And I think that's one of the great things about the Feldenkrais method is we do it slow so the person can learn, and we make it in a safe way so that the nervous system says, this is safe, this is not going to hurt. But the nervous system has to calm down for that to happen. And the Feldenkrais method can really be utilized in healthcare to a much larger extent than what it is now.
Also, this using the artificial floor is another way to recruit this non-habitual way of, the person suddenly having to change their organization. I think it's a very effective strategy that we use. We don't use it very commonly, but it is amazing just how when someone feels the foot contacting a flat surface as if it was the floor, that it takes them a little bit out of their habitual way. And the other thing that you mentioned about pain, Actually, one of our chapters was written by Deborah Bose, and it's called Pain and Curiosity, and how she talks a lot about how we can get curious about our pain and learn to have a different narrative, physically and also emotionally around our pain. So, there's 24 different contributors, and we'd love to be able to talk about each one, and each one is fascinating. I wanted to just make sure that I mention that we have a couple of contributors that wrote a chapter on organic learning in schools, and they are working with children at a very young age on how to do non-habitual things, drawing circles in different ways. Eilat Almagor and I've just forgotten. Somebody will remember her name. Anyway, but it's a chapter that's well worth looking at. It reminds you that we need to be working with children. We need to start at school with having a less didactic way of teaching our children, that more exploratory and more curiosity has to be encouraged. So I just wanted to interject that as well on this slide. And we could move on. Oh my goodness. So this is a slide of Prime Minister Ben-Gurion, and it's a rather iconic photograph of him doing a headstand on a beach in Tel Aviv, age 71. And Feldenkrais famously said, there is no limit to our improvement. We can improve at any age. And I've seen this with my own mother, 93-year-old mother, she can improve. We can all improve at any age and in any condition. In any physical condition, there can always be improvement. It's a very important aspect of the way we think. And so Feldenkrais Ben-Gurion actually used Feldenkrais's technique to learn the headstand. And of course, he became extremely proud of this. Both of them, I think, were proud that at the age of 71, he could learn to do a headstand. And Ben-Gurion felt it was also increasing his own potency and that people would respect him more if he could do this thing. So it shows, again, just the wide scope of our work, from children to elderly, from the extremely physically disabled to the highly abled and capable, but everyone can really improve with this work. So I did want to, oh yes, here's our slide with Jerry Carson. He was the organizer of the last training that Feldenkrais taught, but he was also one of the people that was very instrumental in bringing Feldenkrais to North America. And it's thanks to him that we have a lot of the materials that we use for teaching. Jerry was the son that Moshe never had. And Moshe was the father that Jerry never really had. And I wanted to quote again from the same foreword. He says, I think Moshe was the strong Jewish father figure I did not have. My biological father was a sweet, loving, very quiet Jewish man from the same region of the border between Russia and the Ukraine as Moshe. I sang Jewish songs to Moshe, which I had learned as a child. We held hands often, once for hours, on a long car ride in Massachusetts. I was the son he never had. And there are many conversations that Jerry recalls, and one of them was, Moshe, how do you wish to be remembered for your work? And he says, what will I care? I'll be dead. If you had to do it over, what would you like to have been or done? An actor. And back to functional integration, Moshe's last definition of functional integration was what a person needs, what the person will accept, what the person will use. And this is really our challenge as teachers of the method, is that we have to meet them where they are. We can't simply impose our own way of wanting to change or correct them. And he famously said, to correct is incorrect. And I love that quote personally very much. And Moshe says about this quote, what a person needs, what the person will accept, what the person will use. I see this all the time in his lessons. So it's a very interesting way to look at working with someone. Give them what they need and what they can accept, and how functionally it will affect their lives. So I think that we are at the end of our slideshow, Elizabeth. I bet you've got lots of questions for us.
Yes, well, I have lots of questions, and Donald Siong asks, how long is a Feldenkrais class?
45 minutes approximately, sometimes a bit longer, sometimes only 20 minutes, but usually about 45 minutes to an hour. Good question.
Would you explain why Moshe Feldenkrais thought that a 45-minute attention span was optimal for the nervous system?
I think that is the human being's optimal attention span. So after about 35 or 40 minutes, for example, when we work with children, we never work more than 30 or 35 minutes. That's their attention span. I think ultimately adults are in probably the same position. So it's easy to overdo. It's easy to go too long. That's what I would.
And I think you see it in education too. Traditionally, it's been about 50 minutes or so. I'm not sure people can pay attention for 45 or 50 minutes anymore. I know my lessons tend to be a little bit shorter because I think the attention span is getting shorter in people. But traditionally it's been 45 to 50 minutes.
Yes.
I see that Eleanor has just been posting, Eleanor Silverstein, who is actually related to Moshe, and she's written in the first chapter about her relationship with Moshe, but she also is a specialist in working with the gut-brain connection, which I think is quite fascinating. She has a lesson in the book accessible via QR code. So I just wanted to mention Eleanor as well. And there's a beautiful photograph of her and Moshe in the book that you will just have to get to be able to see it.
Donald also asks for information regarding the 4-year Guild Certified Feldenkrais training. Could you speak about the process of becoming a Feldenkrais practitioner?
You're in the middle of the training now, Chrish. So
I'm actually doing
time.
my second Feldenkrais training with Dr. Jeff Haller in Seattle. It's called the Feldenkrais Training Academy. But actually, if you go to feldenkrais.com, you can learn about the 4-year training, Guild certified training. It is a 4-year training, and there's a lot of learning involved, a lot of experiential, and a lot of reading, and a lot of homework. And Anat Baniel has trainings that are slightly different. They're 2 years and a little bit more accelerated. But there are many ways to learn this work, but we do really think that the training process needs to be long, extensive, and we never stop learning. I don't think there's any of us practitioners who stop learning and doing advanced trainings and learning more and more. It is a process of lifelong learning. And I don't think we ever feel like, I've got it now, I know it all. Never.
And just to clarify a little bit, it's not that you're at the school for 4 straight years.
Yeah.
You know, it's usually about 8 weeks a year, and it could be broken up into 2-week segments, summer segments, and so forth. But it's usually about 8 weeks every year.
Yes. Prior to additional questions, let's take a look at the slide about the book so that people will know how to order the book and to use their 20% discount code.
It's a very generous discount.
Yes, yes. So this gorgeous book, the Feldenkrais Method, Learning Through Movement, is available until July 30th for participants in this webinar for a 20% discount. And you can see the code, so take a screenshot of the code MTL 1820 that you can use at checkout. Yes. Back to the to additional questions, this time coming from me. I have noted during this 14-month period of the pandemic that it seems to me that interest in the in the Feldenkrais method has been growing, popping up more frequently, with mention of it made in the context of fascia research, in the context of the biotensegrity community, of applied biotensegrity, and also in the context of neuroscience with the laboratory research on neuroscience. Would you speak about the intersection of Moshe's work and these interdisciplinary fields, such that perhaps Moshe was really decades ahead? Although he was a scientist in his own right, he was decades ahead of this, presaging the science of our time.
Well, Dr. Norman Deutsch called Moshe Feldenkrais the first neuroplastician, in that his really ideas on neuroplasticity, back in the 50s and 60s, actually still are really relevant today. And I'm sure, Staffan, you might want to add to that as well.
Yeah, I think if I look at the nervous system and what we know today about the nervous system and how the nervous system changes so much quicker than we could ever have imagined, I think Moshe was onto that, even though he couldn't see it, he couldn't measure it. But he measured learning through saying, okay, so this person is now moving differently, they're acting differently, therefore something must have changed. Well, the only thing that could really influence the whole body in that way is going to be the nervous system. So he implied that there was a change in the nervous system. Now we know that the nervous system changes so much quicker than we could ever have imagined. And it can change. It can change back and forth. It's not a static thing up in the brain or anything. It changes much quicker than we could ever have imagined. And I think yoga, tai chi, and Pilates, and a lot of those different forms of movement changes the nervous system in ways that we could never have imagined. But Moshe was on it, and he understood it from a nervous system perspective. As far as the fascia and the biotensegrity, it's harder to say, at least for me, to connect that to Moshe's thinking. Maybe you're more into the biotensegrity, Chrish, so you can probably talk more about that.
I think people should go to the Move to Learn webinar on biotensegrity, because I do not consider myself really an expert on it. I'm still learning, but I'm absolutely riveted by it. I think it's fascinating. And so, yeah, I'm sure on the YouTube channel of Move to Learn, there is one, but I don't feel like I know enough about it, except that it makes such sense. And listening to someone like John Sharkey talking about it is absolutely compelling. I mean, I'm really amazed and very excited by it, by the way. So it may be the future.
And I think also I think we also have to come back and while we learn about science and while we know about the new ideas around science, the important thing is really, how does it affect you? Now, the explanation that we dream up based on science and so forth is not as important as, is this person functioning better? Can they do what they want to do in life? Do they relate differently? Do they feel better? Is there a sense of wellness? I mean, that is so much more important than the explanation that we have, because I guarantee you 5 or 10 years from now, we have another really cool explanation. But it's about people changing. That is really the method is about. And if people change, society will change, and then we can look at a bigger picture there.
Yes.
And indeed, as Katrina says, the brain's way of healing, and the brain that changes itself from Norman Deutsch, both mentioned Feldenkrais, and I think the brain's way of healing even has a chapter about Moshe Feldenkrais and his life. It's really amazing that that bestseller is included the work of Feldenkrais.
Yes, I have another question regarding the efficacy of the Feldenkrais method and Feldenkrais approach to trauma. You mentioned, Staffan, that there's some qualities of the Feldenkrais approach to movement that is brings on a feeling of safety, such that the nervous system can calm down in order to learn. Would you amplify that, or just speak more about what are the aspects or the qualities of the Feldenkrais method that make it such an effective platform?
Well, I think part of it is that the movement, if I look at the awareness through movement, for example, it's self-directed. So it's not someone taking you through movements necessarily. Now, the functional integration, a big difference in the training of a Feldenkrais practitioner compared to a physical therapist, and I can say that since I teach physical therapists, is that during the 4 years you train in the Feldenkrais method, you develop a sensitivity in yourself. So when I put my hands on someone, if I do a functional integration, I get a sense for, let's go here, but no further, because I start feeling some tension in you now. And if I deal with someone who has chronic pain, who has, traumatic events, and we all have traumatic events in our lives, then that's where I stop. And I can stay on that edge a little bit, but I'm not going to go into it, because as soon as I go into somewhere where the person is not comfortable, they go back into their habitual patterns again. So I can really stay on that edge when I work one-on-one with a person. When I work in a group with awareness through movement, then again, it's self-directed to some extent. Try this movement. Go as far as you're comfortable with. Don't go any further. Here's another way of doing it, because if I have some trauma and it fires up after I do a certain movement, well, we can probably figure out another way to do that movement, to get around it, and then come back to that movement, because when we did the alternative, it was safe. Now you can go back into that. So it's all about building up this safe container, and I think it's something that to some extent counselors use and so forth too, is that let's build up safety and trust first. And we do it in the Feldenkrais method through movement, through hands-on, through a variety of movement, so that we don't kind of jump straight into something where you're not ready to go. It's about what are your needs, what do you accept, and how do you use it? And it's about what you accept. And if we try to go too far, the person doesn't accept it, they go straight into their habits and their traumas again.
Thank you.
I work a lot. Are we done? Do we have to go? I just want to say I work a lot with actors, an actor myself, and I do a lot of directing as well. And I found that one of the most useful things of working with an actor is really getting them, because actors are notoriously paranoid. They're always in a state of tension. They always think I'm not good enough and I can't, this role is beyond me. And just being able to bring an actor to that state of safety and calm, and finding, in a sense, a neutral place from which they can build their character. There's actually a chapter on theater by Thomas Campe in the book. And the capacity for, again, the nervous system to just find that place of calm and neutrality, to be able to build their character and go on stage without all of the trauma and the past things in their own lives, where they can really divorce themselves from that. It's huge. And that's, I think, why Feldenkrais loved the theater. He worked a lot with Peter Brook as well. And there are many others in the book that we haven't been able to mention, but certainly working with creativity is very important. There's a chapter by Melania Plonka, who is an actor, a mime, and a teacher of the Feldenkrais method.
Thank you both. There's a really significant comment in the chat from Eleanor Silverstein. Dr. Feldenkrais originally created this body of work to help people who came to Israel from the Holocaust. He knew in order for them to create a new life, they had to work through their trauma. These lessons were designed at the beginning to help them reorganize themselves for health and safety and self-intelligence. Really quite magnificent, and Eleanor has spoken with many original students from these classes. I had no idea, Eleanor. Thank you so much for that contribution.
And there's much more about this in her chapter, which is the first chapter in the book. So very much, thank you, Eleanor. It's great, very helpful.
Yes. We're getting to the end of our additional 10 minutes. So Chrish and Staffan, do you have some closing comments before you're on to your next events?
No, I mean, it's really great. I mean, this was fun, and writing the book has really opened my eye to the breadth of applications for the method. And it's really nice to see how people apply it. And I think the reader can really get a sense of the applications, but underlying all the applications are some common themes. So even though we had people that probably didn't even know each other, living in different countries, different parts of the world, there was a common theme somewhere under there. And the theme tends to then be learning, safety, go as far as they can and what they can accept. And it was really, for me, it was a joy to, well, it wasn't always a joy, but most of the time it was a joy to read the chapters and edit the chapters. And really, it brought me to a different understanding of the method, I think.
Yes, putting the book together was a 3-year process. It was very lengthy, very detailed, and I agree. We learned a lot in the process, and we got to know people we didn't really know very well. And I think the book is very rich. There's some lovely illustrations from Tiffany Sankari, who's a practitioner. And she's done some very lovely illustrations for various parts of the book. And there's a lot to discover. And again, don't underestimate the QR codes, because if you want to get a sense of what a Feldenkrais lesson might be like, you just literally take your iPhone, point it at the QR code, and you have immediately a recording of it, which is associated with the website that we created for it. So that was kind of fun. But we want to thank Handspring.
I actually have to say, if you don't use the QR codes and play with the audio lessons, you're probably missing 75% of the book, because that really is the application.
Yeah, it's very exciting. And there's some video as well. But we want to thank Handspring also. They've been a lovely company to work with. We really enjoyed everybody who works there. They're extremely kind and responsive. We're very grateful to them.
Yeah.
Grateful
Wonderful.
to you, Elizabeth, for being such a great interviewer. And grateful to you, Staffan, for being my co-editor.
Grateful to Chrish, and grateful for Elizabeth to getting up so early in the morning on the West Coast.
2 days in a row.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure. Such a good cause. I'm really eager to dive into the book in detail to learn more as a bridge to my second training. I can follow in your footsteps, Chrish.
Well worth it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all. Thank you, everyone. We'll look forward to seeing you at our next webinar.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you.